She sent the message with her heart pounding and a shy smile on her face. Something was changing, and she knew it. During lunch, Sarah decided to share the news with James. He was still immersed in his phone, as if the world around him didn't exist. "James," she began, trying to keep her voice steady, "Amanda invited me to exhibit my work at an art and design event." He finally looked up with a bored expression. "Art event?" he said with an ironic tone. "And what do you think you're going to get out of it? Some empty compliments?" Sarah didn't flinch. There was something different about her now, a strength she didn't even know existed. "I don't know, James, but I know I can't let this opportunity pass me by." He snorted and looked back at his phone, as if it didn't matter. "Don't get your hopes up, Sarah. This Amanda is just being polite. It won't get you anywhere." His words were like cold water, but this time, Sarah didn't feel the same pain she always did. She smiled to herself, remembering what Amanda had said. Your talent needs to be shared. That night, Sarah began to organize her pieces. She separated the most beautiful fabrics, the most intricate embroidery, and worked late into the night. Each stitch, each seam, was made with more hope than ever. As the clock struck midnight, Sarah stopped for a moment, looking around. Her small room was covered in colorful fabrics, threads, and needles. She took a deep breath, feeling something different. She was finally believing in herself. Outside, James remained indifferent, locked in his world. But in that moment, Sarah decided that her life would no longer revolve around his approval. For the first time, she was choosing herself. And this was just the beginning. The day of the event finally arrived. Sarah woke up early, her heart beating faster by the minute. As she got ready, she thought about what she was about to do. Exhibit her pieces to strangers, face stares and judgments, but also, perhaps, find recognition. She chose a simple but elegant dress, in keeping with her essence. She carefully packed the handmade bags into boxes, checked everything several times, and headed to the event venue with her hands firmly on the steering wheel. For the first time in a long time, she didn't need James by her side to feel safe. Upon arriving, Sarah was greeted by Amanda, who was impeccably dressed and smiling, as always. "Sarah, you came? I'm so happy. Your space is here. I chose a place where everyone will be able to see your pieces." Sarah looked around. The room was large, full of light, with well-set-up stands and artists of all kinds arranging their work. Amanda led her to her space, a delicate table, well-placed, with a small sign that read, "Sarah Miller, Pieces Made with Love. If you need anything, I'm here." "Show the world what you have to offer," Amanda said, gently squeezing Sarah's shoulder before walking away. For a few minutes, Sarah stood there, feeling the weight of the moment. People were starting to come in, the other artists were smiling and chatting with visitors, and she was still there, as if the floor was glued to her feet. But then something changed. A woman approached her table, looking at the pieces with genuine interest. "Did you make all of this by hand?" she asked, picking up one of the embroidered bags. Sarah smiled and answered in a shy but firm voice, "Yes. Every detail is handmade, with great care." The woman smiled, impressed, and soon called a friend over to take a look. Soon, other people started stopping by, curious about the delicacy and originality of Sarah's work. They touched the pieces, complimented the embroidery, asked about the materials. "I've never seen anything like it. It's so unique." Those phrases, they're beautiful, inspiring. Sarah couldn't believe it. For the first time, strangers were seeing the value of what she did. She answered each question carefully, without hiding the pride that was growing inside her. Then, in the midst of the commotion, Sarah saw James. He was there on business, accompanying his boss. When he saw her, his steps stopped, his gaze fixed on her and the small group of people now surrounding the stand. He stood there for a moment, motionless, as if unsure of what to do. Trying to maintain his composure, James approached. When the people around him moved away for a moment, he muttered softly, "You really took this seriously, didn't you?" Sarah looked at him calmly. This time, there was no fear or anger. "Yes, James, because I believe in what I do." Before he could answer, Amanda appeared at Sarah's side, beaming with joy. "James, did you know that your wife is an incredible talent? People love her pieces. That's exactly how many artists get their start." James was speechless. For the first time, he couldn't deny the truth in front of his own eyes. He gave her a dismissive look and walked away, leaving Sarah and Amanda standing there. Sarah watched him walk away, feeling a slight pang in her chest. For years, she had sought his approval, but now, finally, she didn't need it anymore. By the end of the event, Sarah had received her first orders. Clients left contact information and ordered custom pieces. One lady even suggested that she sell her creations in local stores. When it was all over, Amanda went back to Sarah and, with a tight hug, said, "I knew you would be successful. This is just the beginning." Sarah went home that night, carrying her empty boxes, but her heart was full. For the first time, she knew that her work had a place in the world. And this was just the first step in a long journey that was about to begin. In the days that followed the event, Sarah felt as if she had woken up from a long sleep. For the first time, what she did seemed to matter not only to others, but most importantly, to herself. People's compliments were still echoing in her mind, and the small requests she had received were carefully noted in her notebook. As she folded fabric and sorted threads for the orders, an unexpected message arrived on her cell phone. It was from a man named Andrew Collins, the owner of a renowned local boutique. "Hello, Sarah. I saw your pieces at the event and was impressed. I would like to talk about the possibility of selling your bags exclusively in my store. Can we meet this week?" Sarah paused for a moment, breathless. She reread the message several times in disbelief. This was an opportunity she had never imagined. Exclusive in a boutique? Is that real? She thought, holding her cell phone with trembling hands. At dinner that night, Sarah decided to share the news with James. She knew he would probably not react well, but she felt she had to say it. "James, I received an important proposal today. A boutique owner wants to sell my bags exclusively." James, who had been eating in silence until then, put down his cutlery and stared at her with an expression of pure contempt. "Boutique? Do you really think this will get you anywhere? Sarah, stop living in this fantasy world. This is a waste of time." The words were harsh, but something inside Sarah had changed. She took a deep breath and answered firmly, "James, you can think whatever you want, but I have decided. I will accept this offer. Finally, someone sees the value of my work, and so do I." James let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "You are playing with the stability of this house. This art of yours doesn't pay the bills." "You are wrong, James. I have already started paying some bills with what I have earned. And you know what? This is just the beginning." He fell silent, stunned by her firmness. For the first time, James seemed to realize that he no longer had control over Sarah. In the following days, Sarah threw herself headlong into her work. Her small room turned into a veritable makeshift studio. Piles of fabric, boxes of thread, and patterns filled every corner. She worked from morning until late at night, sewing, embroidering, and planning her pieces with a smile that had not been seen in years. The first delivery to the boutique was a success. Andrew Collins was delighted with the quality and originality of her work. "Sarah, your pieces have an authenticity that the market is looking for. This is going to be a hit." As Sarah walked home that afternoon, something inside her blossomed: confidence. For the first time, she felt like she was building something with her own hands, without depending on anyone else's opinion. That night, James came home and saw the chaos that dominated the living room. He stopped in the entryway, looking at the scattered fabrics and full boxes. "Are we turning into a factory now? Is that what you want? To turn our house into a mess?" Sarah, who was calmly sewing, stopped what she was doing and looked at him. Her voice was firm, without hesitation. "Yes, James. I accepted the boutique's offer, and this mess is the beginning of my future. You may not believe it, but I believe in myself." James was speechless. He huffed in annoyance and went upstairs, slamming the bedroom door. Sarah went back to sewing, but this time with a serene smile on her lips. She knew it wouldn't be easy. She knew she would face criticism, resistance, and obstacles, but there was one thing no one else could take away from her: the certainty that she was on the right path. And for the first time, Sarah didn't need James' approval to move forward. The next few days were the most challenging of Sarah's life, but also the most rewarding. She spent hours on end in her small makeshift workshop, sewing each piece with love and care. Each order delivered to the boutique felt like another step towards a future she never thought possible. Andrew, the owner of the boutique, soon realized the potential of Sarah's bags. "Your pieces are selling very well, Sarah. Customers are coming back and asking for more. We need to increase production." Sarah was surprised. Increase production, she thought, feeling a mix of joy and fear. This meant more work, more challenges, but also more recognition. As demand grew, the living room began to fill up even more. Fabrics, boxes, tools, every corner had a purpose. Sarah hardly stopped, but unlike before, she felt alive. She was building something real. However, for James, this was a constant nuisance. Every night he would come home from work and make a point of complaining. "Sarah, this mess is unbearable. Our house is not a workshop. How far do you think this will go?" One night, he went further. "Do you really think that half a dozen bags sold in the boutique will turn you into someone important? Wake up, Sarah. You still depend on me for everything." Those words hit deep, but Sarah didn't cry. She stopped what she was doing, looked directly at James, and calmly replied, "James, the last few credit card bills were paid with money from my work. I don't depend on you anymore. I'm not trying to be important to anyone but myself." James froze. He didn't know what to say. For the first time, Sarah didn't lose heart, didn't back down. He simply left the room, leaving her alone. While Sarah continued to focus on her work, something began to change between her and James. He became increasingly distant, avoiding conversation and ignoring what was going on around him. His coldness no longer fazed her. One day, Andrew sent her an unexpected message. "Sarah, I'm participating in a national design fair in New York. Your pieces are a success, and I want to take them with me. Can we prepare a new collection?" Sarah read the message several times. New York? A national fair? It seemed like a dream. She could hardly believe that her art, which had been ignored for so long, was beginning to conquer the world. But the joy also brought a challenge. To meet demand, she would need to invest in materials, tools, and even hire temporary help. This meant a financial risk she had never considered before. That night, over dinner, Sarah tried to talk to James. "James, an incredible opportunity has come up. Andrew wants to take my pieces to a design fair in New York. I need to invest a little now, but this could open huge doors." James put down his fork and laughed, undisguisedly. "New York? Now you think you're going to be famous? That's ridiculous, Sarah. You're deluding yourself. You're going to throw money away and then come crying to me." Sarah didn't let herself be discouraged. She took a deep breath and replied, "I'm not asking for your permission, James. I'm just warning you. I'm going to do this because I believe in my work." James stared at her, surprised by her determination. He knew that the woman sitting across from him was no longer the same Sarah she had been before. Something inside her had changed. She was no longer fragile, no longer dependent on his approval. In the days that followed, Sarah worked tirelessly. She used her savings, bought new materials, and made each piece with even greater care. It was a risk, but she knew she had to take this step. The day before the pieces were to be delivered, Sarah stopped for a moment and looked around. Her living room, now a veritable atelier, was filled with finished bags, each one unique, each made with the best she could offer. She smiled to herself, feeling a peace she had not known for a long time. James might still doubt her, but that no longer mattered. For the first time, Sarah was betting on herself, and she was ready for whatever came. On the morning of the event in New York, Sarah found herself facing a moment that seemed surreal. The carefully packaged pieces were ready to be delivered to Andrew, who would take them to the fair. It was a huge step, something she never imagined she would achieve when she began sewing at that small table in her living room. Before leaving, she stopped for a moment and looked around. The room was chaotic, but for Sarah, it was a reflection of something bigger, the birth of her dream. Taking a deep breath, she picked up the boxes and headed toward the boutique, where Andrew was waiting for her with a smile. "Sarah, these pieces are wonderful. I'm sure they'll delight the public." Sarah thanked him with a sincere smile. As she watched the boxes being loaded into the car, she felt a mix of anxiety and hope. Her art would be featured in an international event, and that meant she was finally being seen, not as an ordinary person, but as a creator and artist. Meanwhile, at home, James watched everything with a closed expression. He didn't say anything when Sarah came back to get some things, but there was something different in his eyes. Maybe it was disbelief, perhaps it was fear of losing something he didn't know how to value. A few days later, the fair began. Sarah couldn't be there in person, but she followed everything through Andrew's messages. With each update, her heart raced. "Sarah, your pieces are getting a lot of praise. Clients are asking if you accept international orders. A design magazine came by and photographed your bags. They want to talk about you." As she read the last message, Sarah dropped her cell phone on her lap, her hands shaking. A design magazine wanted to talk about her? That was more than she dared to dream. Her eyes filled with tears, tears of gratitude and victory. When Andrew returned from the fair, he brought even more impressive news. "Sarah, your pieces were an absolute success. A store in New York wants to work with you on an exclusive line." "New York?" Sarah repeated, almost in disbelief. "Yes. This is just the beginning, Sarah. You have something special, and the world is starting to notice." Sarah could barely contain her excitement. She spent the night sewing, reflecting on the path she had taken to get there. From an insecure, criticized, and ignored woman, she was now an artist with international offers. But not everything was rosy. When she shared the news with James that night, his reaction was predictable. "So that's it? Now you think you're going to be famous? Are you going to abandon us in exchange for an empty dream?" Sarah looked at him, this time without hesitation. "James, it's not about fame. It's about respect. I've learned to respect myself and value my work. And if you can't do the same, I can't help you." That was the last time James tried to belittle what she did. For the first time, he remained silent, without any way to respond. Something in his eyes showed that, deep down, he knew that Sarah had won, not only in her professional life, but also within herself. A few days later, the magazine article was published. The cover featured a photo of the bag Amanda had received for her birthday, with the title, "Art with a Purpose: How Sarah Miller Turned Simplicity into International Success." Sarah held the magazine in her hands, tears streaming down her face. She remembered all the times she had been doubted, all the harsh words she had heard. And yet, there she was, recognized for the talent that had always been there, but that no one wanted to see. She smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. Months had passed since the New York Fair. Sarah's life had completely changed. Her small, makeshift studio had given way to a large, bright space that she had rented downtown. Every corner displayed her pieces, made with the same love and care as always, but now with the confidence of someone who knew her own worth. The orders grew every day. Her bags were in the windows of renowned stores, not only in the United States, but also in other countries. The name Sarah Miller was beginning to be synonymous with originality and talent in the world of artisanal design. One afternoon, while reviewing the details of a new collection, Sarah received an unexpected invitation. She had been selected to exhibit her pieces in Milan, the fashion capital of the world. It was the culmination of everything she had worked hard for. She smiled as she read the email, holding her cell phone as if holding a piece of her own dream. At the launch event for her new collection, Sarah had hosted a reception in a luxurious ballroom, the same one where Amanda had celebrated her birthday a while back. Now, the spotlight was all on her. Customers, retailers, and journalists milled about the space, complimenting her pieces and asking questions about the future of the brand. Amidst the crowd, a familiar figure caught her eye: James. He was standing there at the back of the room, clearly out of place. For a moment, Sarah studied him. He seemed smaller, as if the weight of his choices had finally fallen off his shoulders. When their eyes met, James approached, with the same uncertain tone of someone who no longer knew where he belonged. "Sarah, you did it." She smiled serenely, without resentment, but also without any sign of submission. "I did it, James, because for the first time, I believed in myself." He lowered his eyes, speechless. When the event came to an end, Sarah walked through the now empty hall, feeling an indescribable peace. She stopped in front of a bag on display, the first bag she had ever given Amanda. There was like a symbol of where it all began. With tears in her eyes and a smile on her face, Sarah whispered to herself, "The best kind of revenge is success, and I earned it by being exactly who I am." In that moment, Sarah knew she had won, not against James or against those who doubted her, but against fear, insecurity, and lack of faith in herself. Now, she was free, and the only direction she had left was up.